Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this first ERION Digital Session. I am Borana. I work as project manager at the EARMA, and today I will be your web host. I'm very happy to see that we have more than 90 registered participants today, and I see that in the attendees we're already 60. So happy to see that you are numerous today, and there is an interest to stay connected with the community in these challenging times. Before I start the webinar, I would like to outline a few ways on how you can interact on Zoom. Probably you are already familiar with it, but at the bottom of the screen, there is a black bar, and if you put your mouse on it, you'll see a few labels, among which chat and Q&A. If you want to introduce yourselves or interact with the other participants, you can use the chat. And to ask questions to the speakers, please use the Q&A. Jonas, who is the moderator of the session today, and myself will then be handing over the questions for you to the speakers. So I think that it is all from my side. I would like to hand over to Jonas, who is a Research Ethics and Integrity Coordinator at Stockholm University. He is also ERION co-chair. Jonas, take it over.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm not going to spend much time here. Basically, my job now is to hand over to the speakers. But I want to mention too that we have our the second moderator. She will also moderate the session on Wednesday, so you will get to see more of her then. But we have been working on this, the document that will be presented shortly, in a working group consisting of me, Stephanie, Karim, and Eva. Present document, and we're looking forward to hear your opinions on it, especially if you have comments on how it can be improved in order to be as useful as possible for you in your work at your respective institutions. So, as I said, Karim and Eva will present a document. Karim Mahmoud is a managing director at the Inspire Alliance and has a background in research in the life sciences and works on things, of course, research integrity and ethics, but also open science and RRI more generally. And Eva Casamitjana is a scientific coordinator at IS Global and works on pre-doctoral and post-doctoral research development, scientific coordination, but also with a certain focus on research ethics and integrity. And they will now give a presentation of this document, which is supposed to be it's an outcome from the meeting that we had in Eindhoven earlier this year. But Karim and Eva will also give you more background on the document, so I won't take up more time here, but rather hand it over to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jonas. I will share my screen. Oh, sorry for that. Okay, so welcome to this EARMA Digital Session organized by the ERION network. So as Jonas, Karim and myself will present on behalf of the working group that worked on the outcomes of the meeting on implementation of training programs for researchers in research ethics and in integrity. And so the members of this working group were Stephanie van der Burg, Jonas, Karim, and myself. So this meeting took place the 9th of March, as before we all got confined at home in Eindhoven, and it was focused on training programs on research ethics and integrity. In the afternoon, we organize a World Cafe. So we use the World Cafe methodology to discuss in 2 breakout sessions best practices for the implementation of training programs in research ethics and integrity, and which in the second session, the key elements for implementing such programs. So in session 1, in particularly, we discuss good practices, links to existing resources, while in the second one, we ask participants to imagine how an ideal training program in research ethics and integrity should look like. There was 5 working groups, and participants could switch between one session and the other. And each session, each working group had a moderator and a rapporteur. So with the summaries of the rapporteurs, the working group then work on developing this document that it's now, since a few minutes ago, available on the Synapse for all ERION members to provide feedback and make it a more useful document for the community. So first to mention is that we all thought that any research performing organization should have some sort of training in research ethics and integrity. And of course, depending on the size of the organization, its capacities, its resources, the applicable law regulations, then this training should be adapted. And it should be, of course, integrated all these aspects to facilitate promotion of compliancy, high quality research, and high standards in research ethics and integrity. So first thing we did is to try to organize the discussion reflected in the reports in 3 main themes that reflected key features. First, regarding policy framework, institutional embedding and leadership. Second one on audience, and the third theme on learning outcomes and delivery. And as you can see, they are all interconnected, but I will present first the policy framework, the institutional embedding and the leadership, and Karim will follow on with the other 2 themes. So as a basic starting point regarding the policy framework, we thought that the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity should be the starting point and the basis as a policy document to be considered. As you know, the code was developed by the European Academies of Sciences and Humanities, and the European Commission considers this code as a reference document for all funded European projects in relation to research integrity. But beyond that, that it should be a document, a model document for organizations and researchers across Europe. But of course, when organizing and preparing a training program, not only the European policy framework should be considered, but you should analyze your national, regional, and institutional policy framework. So here as an example, I put the Danish Code of Conduct for Research Integrity that operates at national level. At regional level, I put an example that is close to mine. It's a code of conduct for CERCA centers in Catalonia, which is the network of research centers in Catalonia, and all research centers in this network are bound to this code of conduct. And certain institutions can have also their own code that should be the basis as a policy document to consider. But beyond the policies directly, or code of conducts directly related to research integrity, there might be other initiatives or statements that your institution might have endorsed that should be considered as well. As an example here, as you probably know, every 2 years there is the World Congress on Research Integrity, and there are sometimes consensus documents arising from these meetings that can be endorsed by organization. And I put here as an example the Montreal Statement on Cross-Boundary Research Collaborations, the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity, or from the last meeting, the Hong Kong Principles for Assessing Researchers, which is actually partially based on the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment and the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics. So your institutional framework regarding endorsement of these statements or initiatives that are related to research integrity and ethics should be also taken into account. Then, of course, the funder requirements. This is another critical point to consider. So the advice here would be to see which is your funding landscape and what are the requirements that your main funders are asking in terms of ethics and research integrity to be included and considered when organizing the course. And indeed, picking up on funders' requirements is an efficient way also to raise awareness among researchers and other staff. So regarding the institutional embedding and other policies that the institution may have and can impact on directly or indirectly in research ethics and integrity, there are policies related, for example, to open access, publication policies, compliance, quality in clinical trials, career development, GDPR, and our recommendation here from a network of focal persons, because normally these different responsibilities lay within different administrative functions within an organization, and to build a network of colleagues, experts in these areas as a way of a form of exchange and helping to raise awareness related to research ethics and integrity, and also to provide inputs when organizing and helping develop a training program in research ethics and integrity. And important issue is the work environment and the research climate within the organization. And this goes beyond the learning setting for a particular research ethics and integrity training program. But of course, the impact of the program, of the training program, and on how research ethics and integrity is embedded within the institution will be much enhanced in an institution with an open environment where critical discussions are fostered, learning from mistakes, exchange of experiences, and these are things that help to provide the right atmosphere. And finally, the institutional embedding, the leadership, but I mentioned it again, but it's almost a precondition, the senior support of the institution or of the department to a comprehensive training program in research ethics and integrity. It's almost a precondition, not the least because they should provide enough resources to develop this training. And in a way, to make your point, the advice here would be to present research integrity as a central aspect of quality and excellence in research, and also to point the risk of non-compliance and potential consequences of ethical and integrity breaches. And we think that it is important with the institution to have a research ethics and integrity officer or advisor that helps to visualize the importance and the institution provides to this topic. Also as a point of contact point in case of doubts or concerns regarding research ethics and integrity, and of course, a person who can have a major contribution when developing research ethics and integrity training program. So now I will hand the presentation over to Karim, who will go on with the next two themes.
Thank you, Eva, and good afternoon, everyone. So as we have seen, three important themes emerged from the workshops. Eva has spoken about the policy framework, the institutional embedding and leadership, and I will focus on audience and on learning outcomes and delivery. But first, I'd like to reflect on what Eva mentioned, the policy framework and expectations that are set by institutional leaders, funders, and other stakeholders are really fundamental to the success of any ethics and integrity training program. These expectations act as a roadmap for the training by setting a policy, guiding the requirements, and determining the audience. And by audience, we mean who exactly should receive the training. And we also need to, that policy will focus on the intended learning outcomes, as well as how the training is going to be delivered. And although I've depicted this as a linear process, it's really important to understand that these learning outcomes and delivery is connected to the audience, and in turn it's connected to the policy framework. So really they're all interrelated. So I'd like to ask you a question, and perhaps we can launch the poll now, Borana. Compulsory training in research ethics. Oops, sorry, the slides are jumping around. Compulsory training in research ethics and integrity in your organization is aimed at, and you can select more than one option. Is it just PhD students and doctoral candidates, research staff and postdocs? For all those involved in the research process, such as technicians, project managers, data management officers, etc., or no training in research ethics and integrity is provided. So quite a lot of you have shown that their training is compulsory for PhD students and doctoral candidates. And there's a small group as well where no training in research ethics and integrity is provided. So we're going to explore some of these themes in more detail as well. So when thinking about developing a training program, we need to really focus on who the training is aimed at. What is their interest in research ethics and integrity? Perhaps it's important to them how ethical approval is organized within your organization, other institutional policies, and other services. Maybe they want to know about data management support within the organization. We should also consider how engaged they are already with ethics and integrity, and be mindful of how the training is promoted to them. You might also wish to decide if there are incentives for taking part in that training. You could offer certification, for example, in reproducibility, or create integrity champions as a way to encourage active participation, so it can be seen as part of career development for the researchers. What about attendance? Is it going to be compulsory for everyone? As we've seen in the poll, most of you have compulsory policies for early stage researchers, but it's not necessarily compulsory for all staff. It's important to have a balance between the two in order to ensure that you have a minimum standard across the institution. There might be compulsory training that is for everyone, and more niche or advanced topics for those for whom it is relevant. So for example, ethical issues in protecting vulnerable groups, or those that use human subjects. Another important characteristic is the career stage. Some training is appropriate to certain career stages, such as mentoring, and for other careers, other training is suitable for all stages as well. And what about the role of the person? Are you including technicians, project managers, data management officers in your training? These are just some of the considerations when thinking about research ethics and integrity training. By having a clear and unambiguous policy, you can target your intended audience and offer incentives and engagement, and this helps to reinforce a positive culture by ensuring that a broad range of actors, from PhD students to technicians to senior academics, all have a grounding in ethics and integrity, and that will enhance and promote research excellence and a good research culture as well. So let us discuss learning outcomes and delivery. It is clear that once you've identified your audience, you need to decide what the training will consist of and also how it will be delivered. I will talk about these two linked items separately. For the learning outcomes, we need to decide a few things. For the depth and breadth of the training, it's really important to understand your audience. How is your approach to deciding what your researchers and PhD students need to know? And that will be dictated by your policy. Are there topics that only a smaller group of people might need to know, and other information that everybody should be aware of, such as data management practices and ethical approvals? Will you cover all topics in your training? During the workshops in Eindhoven, it emerged that there are many different items that could be covered as part of the research integrity training. There are certain discipline-specific items, such as image manipulation, or as I mentioned before, protecting vulnerable groups, informed consent. But there are other topics that are broader and more general, such as publication authorship and data management, that can be suitable for all. And there are many different areas of research integrity, so you need to carefully decide what are the most important and how much training in each of these topics will be given. And again, to whom? So really, it's important to tailor that content for different audiences, as we already discussed. These are just some examples of the topics. We have listed more in the report. A final point I want to make is that education and raising awareness does not have to be in a specific training session. If at all possible, it's useful to embed the training in other activities and initiatives. For example, during Open Access Week, you can talk about open access and data and best practices for sharing data sets. And throughout the year, most research organizations have conferences, seminars, organize events, and these are opportunities to promote certain topics and highlight the importance of research ethics and integrity. So now it's time for another question. Let's see if this works. Barana, if you can launch the poll. How is training in research ethics and integrity in your organization delivered? You can select more than one option. Is it done via lectures, workshops, via online learning, or other? So many of you have said lectures are the primary way, and we found that as well during the workshops, that those are the most popular method of delivering training. I'm very curious to know what the other is. So could you put that in the chat, what other methods of training you use? That would be very useful to collect for the report. So now we'll move on to how the training will actually be conducted, the delivery part. So in the workshop, it was broadly agreed that resources, time, and policies, as well as national initiatives, determine how the training will be delivered and to whom. Nowadays, it's possible to make the training available online, and there are even specialized vendors who can provide a training solution. But the most common ways are still via workshops and lectures, although online and self-directed training are becoming more and more popular. Some of the feedback suggested that making the training engaging and interactive can encourage people to get more interested in ethics and integrity. From the outside, it can be seen as a boring topic perhaps, so why not try and make it more fun? This can be with role-playing, acting, group activities, and there were some nice examples mentioned during the workshops of activities that can really work. Sharing of experience and having the ability to discuss ethics and integrity problems with peers and other experts can also be helpful, creating that safe space and opportunity so that you can promote that positive research culture. Another point to make is that not all training has to be in a classroom. You can have informal training that's on the job, reading articles, discussion zones, and blogs. And to deliver the training, it doesn't all just fall down to one person. You can call on colleagues within your organization that have expertise in different areas. So we started by mentioning the 3 themes, but as we have now discussed, they are not standalone. Each one is interconnected, and it's important to understand how they link to each other in order to create a useful training program. So as was mentioned at the beginning, we've published this draft guidance document from the meeting in Eindhoven. It's available on the Synapse system, which the ERION community uses. Particularly of interest is this checklist of key elements for research ethics and integrity training programs, which we have pulled together in the document. If you have any thoughts on what we have prepared, including the checklist, please provide your feedback on the Synapse system by the end of June. We welcome your feedback and it will be very useful in finalizing that report. If you do need access to the sign-up system, you can contact Borana as well. And I'll just leave you with our contact details in case you want to get in touch with us. That is all from me. Thank you for listening. Jonas, back to you.
Thank you, Karim. Thank you, Eva. Good presentation. I think it captures the central elements of the report. I cannot see any questions in the Q&A. So please, if you do have questions, post them there and I will forward them to Karim and Eva. And but meanwhile, so this would be a little bit like asking questions to oneself, since I'm also part of this working group. But one thing that I think is interesting is what is our vision with this document? What do we want this document to do for the intended audience? I mean, we have the ERION community here, but you can also imagine that it could be spread outside of that. But mainly for the ERION community and participants of this seminar, what do we want to achieve with this document? Would you like to say something on that?
Yes, so I think the ERION community is very useful just because it's a group of individuals who are working in this area, practitioners, and having the ability to exchange best practices and ideas, particularly on the theme of training delivery. That's very good, giving you inspiration as well on what topics and how the training should be conducted. And that was very much part of the workshop, understanding from the range of different practitioners across Europe and beyond who are working in this area. So the report really captures what was discussed in those workshops so that it's a reference document, and I think that it'll be very useful for others as well.
Yeah, just to add, I think I agree with Karim that the aim is to make it useful, first of all, for the ERION community, but I think it should be open and give it, if we think it is useful guidance to have a broad, so make it available for anybody who's interested in this topic.
Thank you. So now some questions have popped up in the Q&A. Let's see. So Nicole Föger has asked a question of clarification, as I take it. So we often make a distinction between research ethics and research integrity, but our recommendation in this document is to combine research ethics and research ethics and research integrity in training. Is that how you see it? Is that how we see it?
So I think it's in the broad view, yes. So the recommendation here would be to have a either compulsory or a basic course structure in which the basics of both ethics and research integrity are considered, but then specialized training should be provided, and then of course ethic training per se, when it comes to humans, it has its own particular training, and for other topics as well.
And if you just want my perspective, I agree. Broadly speaking, you would want to ensure that research ethics training is provided as well as research integrity. So I think that making sure that you somehow have a policy that covers both is important.
Thank you. And we did have a sort of a follow-up, but I think we basically answered that now. So it's from Jeanette Klonk. Is there a reason why you only hinted at research ethics, as research integrity in the policy framework and not as research ethics? And I think not really, right? We want to have the possibility of a quite broad perspective. We're not intending to exclude either research integrity or research ethics or place a particular focus on any of them. So you might want to look at that in a document if that's something that's unclear. So thank you for that question, Jeanette. It's useful. We have a question from Mariana. You mentioned that there are specialized vendors for online courses. Has a list been compiled? We're especially interested in training on ethics topics for non-biomedical research involving human participants.
From memory, and I'm not trying to advertise for them, I think there was a company called Epigeum that offered training. Perhaps the others know of other companies that offer similar products.
I think, yeah, on ethics but it says not in non-clinical trials, right? I understood.
Yeah,
So,
ethics topics for non-biomedical research involving human participants.
Not that I know. In the with the human participants, there are many, but there might be. But that's why I think we opened the document, and I think it's very useful. There is a link. There is a section on useful resources. There are several there that came out during the session in Eindhoven, and others that we could compile, but it would be really useful if everybody that is participating can provide such resources that can be used then by all. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, we definitely want you to contribute here. I mean, we will have a section at the end of the document. There is already a section, but if you could suggest additions to that section, where we'll list a couple of resources, that would be great. So please, you can post it in the chat, or you can send us emails afterwards, or just communicate it to us in whatever way you find suitable. Okay, so here's a question from Susan Homerson. Do you think ethics and integrity trainings will become mandatory for funders? And could they be part of institutional embedding as a requirement for funders? So this is perhaps a little difficult for us to give a straightforward answer to, but do we have any guess at this question?
Well, the only comment I can make is that there is already an expectation from the European Commission that organizations have processes in place to ensure research integrity and compliance with ethical processes and procedures. And indeed, for certain funding schemes, especially ERC, they're quite strict on the ethical protocols. I'm not sure, certainly my knowledge of funders here in the UK, if there's those that mandate training before they award funding. Certainly, I think it's a good idea, and anything that can promote excellent research would be something that I encourage, but I equally recognize that it might not be so popular for everyone.
Just to add, I'm not really certain on what it will happen, but I think in Horizon Europe, the training, the requirements regarding the ethical part, and then in addition, research integrity policies will be something that they want to get more into in detail, So, but it should be somebody from the European Commission that should know much better. But from what I heard, they will definitely have more requirements and to encourage organizations to have these policies in place and this kind of trainings.
Just to kind of give a tangential example, the Wellcome Trust based in England, they have initiated a policy where they expect not to award funding to principal investigators who have a bullying or harassment allegation against them within universities. So I think that very slowly there are attempts to improve research culture. So I think it will catch up in the future that specific training will become compulsory, particularly in earlier stages of one's career. But I think we've covered this question enough now.
And this, in a way, it leads us to the next question, which is something that we did discuss, but I don't know how much this transpires in a document, and maybe it wasn't that clear in the presentation at least. What about compulsory trainings versus voluntary participation? Was that discussed, and any recommendations on that? We have discussed it. I know we have discussed it, and I know it's in the document. It's at least addressed to some extent, but would you like to add something now?
Maybe.
Sorry, Eva, go ahead. No, go ahead, Eva.
No, it's something that it was discussed, but at least as far as I know, there was not a general agreement. Mostly, probably, it was. So, I think the mainstream was that it should be some kind of a compulsory course, but there are also other examples that came out during the workshop, in which instead of doing it compulsory, they used a system of rewards within the organization to make it not as an obligation, but on the other hand, it provides some reward that makes people interested in a way on having this course. But I would say that the general feeling was pro having some kind of a core compulsory course that provides some basics that everybody should know.
And just to follow on from that, some training is already provided at a general level, such as training in GDPR, which you might not consider as research integrity, but privacy and data protection as a whole is quite important. So that training is usually provided to everyone within the organization, kind of part of the induction. So some things are captured elsewhere, not necessarily directly on the kind of research operations.
And there is, I mean, we've discussed this issue about concerning compulsory or voluntary training, also in other contexts. And Joanna Porcel mentioned in the chat that there are requirements if you want to have funding from the NIH, for instance, you need to take a course and get a certificate, and before you can even apply for funding. So that's one way of structuring this, and that's one very clear example of a funder who has pretty strict requirements. But the impression I had when I talked to researchers about this is that many see this as just something, they just tick a box. They just do this course. They don't really think it's of any use. It's just something that you do because you have to, because otherwise you cannot apply for funding. And that's always a risk when you try to design something that's going to be one size fits all and mandatory for all, that most people, well, what you'll get in the end is something that fits no one. So you need to be very careful about how you design this in terms of generality and whether it's compulsory or not. It's important that these courses are perceived as useful and meaningful and something that, I mean, we do have something in a document about framing it in terms of excellence and risk management. I mean, that what you do is you do yourself a service as a researcher, and as an organization you do yourself a service by providing good research ethics and integrity courses, because that will increase the quality of the research, and also it will put you in a better position to avoid certain risks, not least when it comes to the public's confidence in your institution or I mean, the public's perception of research in general. So I think it's important, and I think that's something we have agreed on in this context as well, that you need to think about this in a broader perspective and see what kind of incentives you can find. In the end, it might be good to have some compulsory course, but then you also need to be careful not to make it just a tick box exercise. We have last question now in the question and answer section. Please do add questions. We still have a little time left if you have any, so please, it's not too late. But it's a very good question and something we've also been thinking about. Do you have any advice on training senior staff? They are less likely to attend courses.
Yeah, that's something that was indeed discussed. One idea was to embed this, so the training within other training that they already, training or activities that they already have to attend, that for example, leadership within leadership course, that would be an idea. But it's a challenging issue, how to engage, especially the most senior, because normally leadership are for junior who before getting senior. And it's something we discussed but didn't really get into a conclusion. I think probably it's the agreement is that when embedding it within already pre-existing activities that they need to attend, it can be helpful. And leadership courses are just an example, but they can be workshops for coordinating projects in some institutions or other kind of activities.
Yeah, I would agree with what Eva mentioned. There was a lot of discussion around the career stages and the appropriateness of training for different stages in one's career. And I think the consensus was that the more senior you are, the more kind of specific your problems become in terms of ethics and integrity. So creating an environment where you can discuss openly and confidentially with colleagues approaches to tackle ethical issues or questions of integrity, I think that that's really key. The other point that I think was raised in one of the workshops was about other initiatives, so to do with reproducibility, open science, to create training programs that can help those who are at a senior stage become more accustomed with these newer kind of emerging issues in research, and provide training in those particular areas so that they can feel confident. It's almost an upskilling rather than kind of, you know, basic training. It's part of career development, I would say.
So we have one more question which connects back to some previous questions. So it connects back to Susan's question about funders and also my question earlier about what we want to achieve with this document. Are we aiming to share this document and our views, experience on research integrity and ethics training to funders? I don't think we have discussed this really, how we intend to disseminate this document or our findings in connection with this, with the writing of this report outside of the ERION community. But I think this is definitely something that we can discuss within the community. I mean, and we might perhaps want to modify it, write a different kind of document. I mean, now we have a report which is aimed to those working in research organizations, but if we do think that there are points here that could be useful for funders as well, that might be a good idea. What do you think?
I agree with what you've just said, Jonas. The document as it's presently constituted is really aimed at an audience within a research organization, someone who's trying to create a research ethics or research integrity training program and looking for best practices. I think it would be a different ask and a slightly different audience if we were to prepare a document for funders, perhaps explaining the challenges with certain types of training or resources that are required. But definitely, I think it's a good idea to have this discussion within the ERION community, the research integrity officers, the whole network, to decide whether there is something there. And I think that's perhaps a separate project.
Yeah, I do agree. And I think this can be a topic for the next ERION meeting to discuss both what to do next with the document, once it includes all the contributions from everybody that are welcomed in the 30th of June. And then afterwards, if we should do some kind of, I don't know, advocacy, you can name it as you like, but with funders and other stakeholders regarding research ethics and integrity training or kind of actions, that could be an interesting maybe topic for a next ERION meeting.
Mm.
And just one more point, sorry, it's a general point actually about one of the challenges with research ethics and research integrity training. Part of the point of delivering training is to kind of increase or refine someone's moral reasoning, because training does not provide clear-cut answers to problems. It raises more questions, if you will. So the reality is quite complex, and training is just a way of kind of discussing the issues and providing a framework, providing good practices, referring to documents, codes of practice, etc., that have already been created, rather than providing a one-size answer to all the ethical or integrity problems that might arise. And that I think is kind of the fundamental challenge of any training in this area. So I think if we're asking for resources from funders in particular to improve the knowledge base or have a broader set of tools, I think that would be welcome by most people working in this area. I don't know if the others might agree.
Mm. Yeah, and I think already this document could be, it could be useful perhaps in the first instance in the work, in the internal work at one's institution. When you're designing the research ethics training, or when you, but also, we have discussed this, how do you present this issue to the leadership and so on. And you can take the same perspective on how you discuss. Might also be able to use the information in a document when you discuss this with funders, if you have that kind of opportunity. So if you point to the different challenges, so that they can, if they want to have requirements, they can make sure that they can adapt them to what the needs and the challenges of the research organizations are. Because in the best possible world, we will have a tight collaboration between all these different stakeholders, and everyone has an opportunity to have an impact on the extent and quality of research integrity and ethics training. I see that Stephanie has joined with her video. Is that an indication that you want to enter the discussion or add something? You're very welcome if you want to.
No, not particularly. No, I was following just in the background. No, perfect. You're doing fine.
Good.
Maybe just the small add in referring to the question of the funders. I think that we also have to bear in mind the goal setting that we have for the ERION group is to actually help people, practitioners in the community, and not as much be a lobby group or a kind of, I don't know what kind of influencing organization towards, for example, funders or other organizations. So I think we have to, we have to bear that in mind as well.
I agree, but that said, we can also, insofar as they ask for our opinion, we are very happy to forward the opinion of the community. So that's
definitely
important to make a distinction. Our primary aim is not to be a lobby group; it's to be
but it could definitely
help our community. It's a good point. Well, I think we've simultaneously run out of questions and time, which I think is ideal when it comes to ending a seminar. So, and I don't think I really need to wrap this up. I think I have had plenty of opportunities to make remarks on the different questions. So I will just, did you want to add something as a general comment, Eva, Karim, or Stephanie?
No, I would just maybe like to pay attention again to any comments or remarks. They are very welcome, so please do send them. via email or via Synapse or whatever to one of us or to Borana, and then they will definitely well, be addressed, and we hope that we can enrich the document even further.
For me, it is a couple of things: to thank the moderators and the rapporteurs from the session in Eindhoven for facilitating the discussions and taking notes, and to also thank EARMA for organizing and taking care of the ERION group, and also Eindhoven Technical University for hosting the event as well, and to the fellow working group members who've helped to put the document together, and to Jonas today for facilitating the webinar.
So after Karim thanking everyone, I just want to join to thank everybody, and also to make the point that was raised several times, but the aim was first to set the document, but contributions are really much needed, and to address them and enrich the document to make it useful for all.
Okay, thank you. I agree, of course, with both of you. Send comments, and thanks for everyone who has contributed. So back to Borana.
Yeah, okay, so you already did my job. You thanked everyone. Well, also thanks then from my part to Jonas for moderating, to Eva and Karim for speaking, to Stephanie for being part of the group, and to all attendees that we had today. Thank you for being here. As mentioned, if you want to comment on the document or have access on the Synapse platform, you can write to me. I'll give you access. And a small announcement, we have another ERION Digital Session, which will take place this Wednesday. And in that case, it will focus on ethics supports and lessons learned from COVID-19, and Stephanie will be moderating the session. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice afternoon, and be in touch soon.